Hello everyone and welcome back to the Beatles Forever. I had a request to do a video about the Beatles uniforms and I couldn't find enough information to create a whole video on it, but I decided to do a video on how the Sgt. Pepper's album came to be, on the uniform and how that was decided, and the album cover and how everything came together on that. I had done a Sgt. Pepper's album video a while back, but I just mainly was bringing up facts about the album. So I thought, well, this will be good because it'll pull together other information that I didn't include in that video. So when Strawberry Fields came into fruition, it was a time when the Beatles were in the next phase of their careers. They had finished touring and they were being artists, according to Paul McCartney. And Paul also said we didn't have to be performing every night, so instead we could be writing or chatting with our mates or visiting an art exhibition. For instance, John and Yoko would never have met if we hadn't had all the time to spare for him to look around exhibitions and bang a nail in. And so the spare time gave them a chance to come up with crazy ideas. Paul at that time was listening to a lot of avant-garde artists, and he went to Wigmore Hall. And George was into Indian music, and they were opening their minds to different areas. Then they would get together and share what they were into with each other. Paul said it was exciting because there was a lot of cross-fertilization, so I like how he phrased that like a gardening term. And then John said that the Sgt. Pepper was Paul's idea. After Paul had gone to America, the West Coast had groups that were into long names. People were no longer the Beatles or the Crickets. They were, according to John, now named Fred and his incredible shrinking grateful airplanes. And Paul got into that. He wanted to put distance between the Beatles and the public. And so there was this identity of Sgt. Pepper. And Paul was funny when he said that there was a jingly, jangly hippie aura all around America. He started to think of a name for a band. He said at that time there were lots of groups with names like Laughing Joe and his Medicine Band, or Colonel Tucker's Medicinal Brew and Compound. And Paul took the idea back to London, and the Beatles at that time were trying to get away from touring and more into the surreal, so that's how the album came to be. And it was Paul's idea the Beatles would become Sgt. Pepper Band. John said it was a concept album, but it didn't go anywhere, and my contributions to the album had nothing to do with Sgt. Pepper and his band. It worked because they said it worked. And George said he thought that they were going to go into the studio to make the next album. And Paul was going on about some fictitious band. And George said that that side of it didn't really interest him, other than the title song and the album cover. Ringo felt that the album gave the band leeway to come up with ideas even for him and try different material. So George wasn't into it before they had recorded like a band and they would learn songs and play them, though they did do overdubs on Revolver. But the Sgt. Pepper album was different. Now Paul was playing piano and Ringo was keeping the tempo, and the rest of the band wasn't playing. George said it was like an assembly process and he found it tiring and boring. He said he enjoyed a few moments making the album, but other than that, he didn't like making the album that much. George had just returned from India and his heart was still there. And after 1966, everything became more like a job, and George was losing interest in being Fab. George felt like they were going backwards with that album. Everyone else thought it was revolutionary, but George preferred Rubber Soul or Revolver. Paul says that since the album was a big production, they wanted the album sleeve to be really interesting. Paul said that when they were kids, they would take a half-hour bus ride to Lewis Department Store to buy an album, and on the way back home take the album out of the bag and read it cover to cover. Paul said they liked reaching out to the record buyer because they remembered spending their hard-earned money on a record. Yeah, I remember those days too. It was exciting to go into the record store and flip all through the category of your favorite artist and try to find that album you were looking for, and then listen to the music when you got home and read the inside of the linear notes. And Paul said that the Sgt. Pepper's outfit they got from Bergman's, the theatrical costumers, and they ordered the wildest things based on old military tunics. That's where people went when they were making films, and they had books that showed you what was available. Paul said they chose oddball things from everywhere and put them together. They chose their own colors and their own materials, and they went for the bright psychedelic colors. And they weren't just carbon copies in different colors. And George was the one Beatle that kept bringing his suit out after the Beatles disbanded. The first time the Beatles put the suits on was March the 30th, 1967, during the Sgt. Pepper album photo shoot. The only other time all four Beatles seemed to be wearing the Sgt. Pepper suits were November 1967, when they did the promo film for Hello Goodbye. And Paul's suit is seen in the video My Brave Face, although the one the Japanese collector guy holds up is a copy. Paul didn't want it to be handled. Ringo's suit was rumored to have been destroyed in a house fire in 1979, but that was just a rumor, and Ringo still has his pink suit. And then when the 50th anniversary of Sgt. Pepper came along, he was wearing it again. Paul said to help them get into character for the band, they started to think about who their heroes would be, who would this band like on the cover. They wrote out a list, and Paul chose Dixie Dean, an old Everton football hero that his dad talked about, Groucho Marx, and more. According to Amateur Photographer, the stage set included 57 photos and 9 waxworks. The group included the deities of Buddha and Christ and George Harrison's for Mahatma Gandhi. McCartney recalled the inner gatefold image. We all said, now look at this camera and really say I love you. Really give love through this. If you look at it, you'll see the big effort from the eyes. But according to John Lennon, Cooper's photo of the band showed 2 people who were flying high on drugs and 2 who weren't. So the final cost of the cover art was nearly £3,000, equivalent to just over £49,000 today, which was a very extravagant sum for a time when album covers would typically cost around £50, and that's like £820 today. Ringo, he loved the album. He said it was special. So when the time came for the sleeve, we wanted to dress up. We wanted to be these people, all the Peppers. It was flower power coming into its fullest. It was love and peace. It was a fabulous period for me and the world. Fraser, a London art dealer, and Robert presented the idea to the artist Peter Blake, and he was good friends with the photographer Michael Cooper. And they went to Peter's house and gave him a little drawing of Paul's as a starting point. The cover was going to be a picture of a presentation somewhere up north. The Beatles were given keys to the city by the mayor beside a floral clock, and inside the cover they were going to be sitting there with pictures of their favorite icons around them. Peter, though, collaged it into one big idea, and all the plants were delivered by a florist. Sir Joseph Lockwood had a meeting with Paul, and they brought the album cover in. It had the flowers, the drum, the 4 Beatles, and the big blue sky. They wiped out all the people behind because he was afraid they might all sue or not want to be on the cover. Paul said, "Don't worry, man. It's going to be great, man." Lockwood said there will be lawsuits. Paul said, "Don't worry. I'll write them a letter. I bet they won't mind." In the end, Brian's office wrote to everybody saying, "Sign here if you agree." Everybody did except Leo Gorsey of the Bowery Boys. He wanted $500. So in the cover, he was in the back row. So they put a bit of blue sky where he was. And Brian thought that the sleeve was wonderful. And George said on the anthology book that there will be those who refuse to be on there saying, "I'm not a lonely heart yet," or "I don't want to be on there." And some people did turn them down. And Gandhi wasn't allowed to be on the cover because he was sacred in India, so his picture was removed. So he was sitting under a palm tree, and they placed another palm tree where he was there originally. Paul said they originally wanted an envelope stuck inside the sleeve with gifts in it, but it was too hard to produce. The lyrics on the back of the cover were a first for a rock album, and the inner sleeve featured artwork by Dutch design team The Fool. Included was a bonus gift of cardboard cutouts designed by Blake and Harworth, and they consisted of postcard-sized portrait of Sgt. Pepper based on a statue from Lennon's house that was used on the front cover, a fake mustache, 2 sets of sergeant stripes, 2 label badges, and a stand-up cutout of the Beatles in their satin uniforms. And now we get to what the Beatles thought of the album. Paul thought that the album was great. It was a good comeback to those who wondered if the Beatles had dried up, as he put it. And George Harrison liked the Sgt. Pepper album when it was over. He knew it was different for the public. And George was very happy with the concept of the cover. A Day in the Life had the big orchestra and the big piano chord, and Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds. He liked the musically, but he said the rest of it was just ordinary songs. So it's funny how inspiration can come from out of nowhere, and Paul being inspired by visiting America, it got him thinking about what kind of name would he have called a band back in the late 1960s. and he came up with Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. It was called a concept album, but John said that everyone contributed songs, and it wasn't really tied to that theme, it just worked out. George wasn't too happy about how they handled recording the songs, and this time, instead of them all learning the songs and playing them as a band, they had songs done in a fragmented way. Paul would play a song on the piano, and Ringo would keep the tempo. It was like an assembly line, as he put it. And when it was over, he liked the cover and the song A Day in the Life, and it didn't help that George had just got back from India and didn't feel like getting back to work at that time. Ringo loved the album, felt it was a chance to get everyone to use their creativity, and he loved the outfits of being a Pepper and the idea of peace and love. Sgt. Pepper's is such a vibrant album. It's an album that brings the listeners in right away. The songs are all perfect, and it feels like they all blend together so well. It took 9 months, and it was well worth the wait. The album cover is a stunner, and the way it's packaged is eye-catching. America, with its jingly-jangly music, hippies, and bands with long names, helped to inspire Paul to create a Beatles masterpiece. So I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you did, if you could give it a thumbs up, it would be greatly appreciated. And I hope everybody's been having a good day, and tune in again soon for another episode of the Beatles Forever. Thank you.